All right, hello Instagram Live. This is Marc here at Mukunda Studio, and this is our July Empower Hour with the topic 100% mixed. And I'm also joined here with my brother, the Stevebros, and also with Natasha, who's coming in. And we are joining together, as we've done for many other of these talks, to be able to dive into this particular topic. We had the same topic last January, which was the start of all these Empower Hours, if you all remember. 100% mixed, in part, is to reference mixed race and having an identity as a person with mixed race. In particular, to my own experience and my brother's experience, where we are half Japanese and half Caucasian. And even within that half of Caucasian, we're a mix of German, Ashkenazi, etc. So what I felt like was interesting for this session, and a trail from our previous session over a year ago, is this idea that essentially we're all mixed. We're all mixed race. That's something that has become part of the evolution of the human experience. To also touch on the notion that race is a construct, and we're also aware of the problems of over-identifying in a way of utilizing race. So it's an interesting topic to be talking about being mixed race, if we say there's really that race is a construct. So that's sort of a little bookmark. But also what I felt was interesting is the idea of having mixedness and other things that we can identify, such as mixed feelings, mixed emotions, mixed blessings, mixed up. What is it to be in that state when we have a feeling of mix of opinion or mix of perspective that I think might actually be part of the equation for understanding oneness? So I'll kind of detail that again to let our minds consider this. What if it's by allowing ourselves to appreciate and identify all the components that make up a whole, that recognizing all the components in and of themselves have identity, and then when we bring it together, it creates an even more all-encompassing identity. And that all-encompassing identity is that oneness, that wholeness that we're seeking. In a way, it's the non-duality. Much of what we work on in our material life, material-bound life, is how do we function in the world of duality? Right, wrong, this, that, inside, outside, you, me. All of it is based off of these separate, distinct elements. And what yoga practice, many spiritual practices are trying to work on is how do we bring this the identity of separateness into oneness? How do we appreciate one another as a component of self rather than as a separate, othered element? Much of my experience of being mixed race has been almost like this othering. Like, you're not this, you're not that, you're something else. So it kind of gets pushed off into another category, which hasn't always been negative. I'll just say that. It's not necessarily negative or positive, but just recognizing when we do cause separation because we just don't know. We don't have context. For someone who has been in that experience, I've had to wrestle to find, well, what is that unifying experience? I am half this, I am half that, but I'm also whole. So if it's, rather than thinking I'm half of a person or half of an identity, the journey has been to know I'm actually a whole, useful person. Maybe everybody doesn't understand that because they don't have that same experience. And how much of that can we relate to in our own personal ways, where the experiences we've had might not be the same as someone else's. So do we have to defend ourselves? Do we try to explain, what is that experience like? So those are some of the topics that I wanted to start with, and that's, in a way, a collective understanding. We all have some kind of mixedness in what we call our race, or even in the way that we recognize the flow of thought and understanding and perspective. Sometimes we feel this way, sometimes we feel that way. Is one right and one wrong, or is it all part of the mixture of dynamic conversation and dynamic being? I'd like to start with a moment to gather and collect in a space of silence. So after offering that and sort of pitching out there some concepts, I'd love to make a little space now, in part to welcome us and also to invite this as a conversation. So take a few moments, whatever you need to do to feel like you can settle, feeling connection to the ground or whatever surface the body is touching. And then a feeling of connecting upwards, whatever part of the self feels to be lifting up towards the sky, towards the cosmos. And then feel that between the flow of that is the breath. The inhale, the exhale, this mix that makes one breath. The breath that connects us, unifies us with our inner world and our outer world. I invite you to take a breath with me, maybe a deep breath through the nose and a deep breath through nose or mouth. A few more moments to arrive. If your eyes have been closed, you can slowly start to open them. All right, and here we are. So I see some folks joining here on Instagram Live. We were just having a little moment of silence to collect ourselves and to connect. So thanks for joining. And I have here on Zoom the Stevebros, my brother, and Vitasha, longtime member and collaborator of these Empower Hours. Welcome. So I'm just going to jump right in and see if any thoughts kind of have bubbled up, or even as you prepared to join in today, anything you want to add into this conversation as we get started. And,
I have a question.
Yeah, my brother's starting us off with a question.
Did you press record?
Oh, dang. No, thank you.
Recording in progress.
All right. Thankfully, we have this Instagram Live that may or may not get finished with it. Sometimes I remember to keep track of it, so it records. All right. So thank you. So next point of order completed. Yeah, anybody want to jump in with any thoughts? And I'm going to turn this.
Yeah, I just want to say something really basic about duality and spiritual practice. I asked my San Francisco Zen Center instructor, what are different ways to focus on the breath while meditating? And she said the first thing you should realize is that your whole body is the breath. Your whole mind is the breath. You are the breath. So she was getting tired of me separating out the breath from the practice, and from the spiritual being. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That was kind of an interesting lesson in duality that I got from my instructor.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
I mean, I get what Steve's saying. He's saying like we can exist even if we're not acknowledging the thing that does exist. If we're only acknowledging it in part, does that mean that it doesn't exist in whole? Is that the vibe that you're trying to say?
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
I respect that.
You're hired as my translator.
She's
I
good at
speak.
that.
Um, I think it's funny because I was having this conversation last night with someone because people do question me often what my ethnicity is, my racial background, what country I'm from, who my parents are, just on physical characteristics like my fair skin. So I'm automatically mixed with this or mixed with that. And it's very interesting to see that in my own community, just an assumption rather than people who do not maybe display the same characteristics. It seems as if you still have the same issue. Like now you're not actually recognizing the whole of me. So I'm saying in that I am African American on both sides, but I display characteristics of someone who is not. And so then that always becomes a question. And I've always felt some type of way about it, but I never once considered the opposition that some people, they look a certain type of way, but there's more to what they are, and they never get recognized in that sense. Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple things about that, and I appreciate Batasha, you're bringing in how much it's about perspective and literally our eyes that are trying to make up the story for people when our hearts kind of are taken out of the equation, sort of like where you were already starting with the Stevebros, that your teacher's reminding you that we're all breath. It's all part of it. It is the whole, I guess, is a way to say it. And when we talk about identifying one another, we tend to segment. Well, skin, that means this. Eyes like that must mean this. Eyes like that I can't compute. Okay, I'll just put that in the other category. You know, we sort of are built, almost designed in our genetics to orient ourselves based on the comfort level we can create with the way we see things. And I think that was a lot of, survival was based on that initially, to know like, where is safety? Where's my tribe? But we live in such a diverse, dynamic world now that I think that's an outdated way of relating to one another, but we still tend to do it because it's deep in our nervous system. So what if we were able to operate from our heart, which is more like how children do when they're playing? Rarely do we see little teeny kids separating because of things like race or different color hair. Sometimes they may play around or inquire about it, but I don't think it causes the tension that we often see as adults, because we start to bring in the power of intellect and, other dynamics of safety and comfort. So I think it's interesting to see, even within a homogenous group, we can start to separate each other because we're just trying to understand. So that's why I tried to think, is it out of hate, or actually we're trying to understand?
Well, I always think that hate is always, it always stems from a limited viewpoint. So if you meet someone who is a traveler and who have interacted with multiple races, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm making sure IG
Okay. If you meet someone who has interacted with multiple countries, multiple dialects, multiple races, and in themselves they can speak different languages, then you have a more learned person who can say, oh, well, because you pronounce your R's in this way, I can tell you're from such and such, or the way that you say this word, I'm recognizing the you that exists. Like I'm seeing your heritage, and I can see how that would be something that is appreciated. But when someone is a little bit more confined, they only have the ABCs. They don't have different colors on their spectrum to say that I can see the whole of you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think that's kind of how it gets a lot more. I don't think we have these issues in other parts of the country. I think we very specifically have these issues in what's the word, where you don't get a lot of outside influences, where the people just kind of recycle one another and they never allow any exterior issues to come into their lives. Like they've never met someone that doesn't look like them. You know?
Yeah.
So I think it's always experience that broadens your perspective, and without experience, you are ignorant. And when you are ignorant, then you make statements, because we always have to define ignorance as being without knowledge, not to mean you're stupid. Everyone's ignorant of something. So maybe the fix to all of these things is always just to have these conversations to say, this is who I am, and this is how I feel about who I am, and allowing people to bring that to the forefront.
Excellent. I love that. If
Yeah,
anybody,
that was,
oh, go ahead, the Stevebros.
that was, the word that I think you were looking for was isolated, maybe. People who are isolated. Oh, look, I did some translating for you. We're both translators for each other.
There we go.
And it just made me think, okay, so say I'm in an isolated culture somewhere in America. So my brain, so it's like I have two choices if I see someone that doesn't match all the people that live around me. One is I can seek familiarity of appearance and characteristics of language, or my brain could choose unfamiliarity, to embrace unfamiliarity, or my brain could choose both. But I think that it's kind of a function of the brain. If the brain can seek both familiarity as well as unfamiliarity, as far as like racial characteristics go, then I think the person's more flexible, whether they were born in isolation or born, more worldly. I think the more worldly people don't really have to think about it. They're like, their brain is accustomed to seeing different cultures and different people, and they seek that out. So I think it's kind of like the question is, what is the individual's brain seeking out? Is it seeking out familiarity of one's own characteristics, physical characteristics, language, or is it seeking out unfamiliarity, or can it seek out both and then whatever else?
I have to jump in and say I love the mixed approach. On theme with our topic today.
It's mixed.
Familiarity.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, right. You get the first prize.
You win this round, and the mixed bell is going off for you.
That's the Stevebros. Yeah, because I think is it possible that that's where we, and then here's where the yoga kind of concepts come in too. There is more flexibility of the mind, not just in terms of identifying through race or racially identifying, but through other topics, other things in the world where we tend to get divided in thought, where it's like, no, this is right and this is wrong. But what if we can stay in a space where we're like, this is one, this is two, or this is A, this is B. Let me be open to what's happening here as a conversation. And the same thing with sort of being able to see familiar and unfamiliar? Can I allow both to be in that space? Because that means I'm going to then learn. I'm educating myself versus sticking with a more homogenized way of operating with, my 1.0 system. This instead is saying, let's update the files a little bit, because there likely is more than what this limited self can perceive. There's likely more than my one life experience can contemplate on. So yeah, I love this opening up in that way, recognizing the starting point with looking at our cultural awareness or racial awareness to see, does this have a broader context? How can we see this way of using our eyes to identify can also stimulate the intellect and the heart?
Well, I think what Steve's trying to, oh, here I go interpreting again, but I think the brainwave that I'm trying to pick up on, I think, is that you can take someone that are born of two different people and then you put them in a different sort of a place. And now we're having a person who is neither or, but is very specific toward that region instead. And I think then we become a different sort of mix. Now I'm culturally this way, I'm racially this way, and my physical location is another. And then you compound into a whole being with no separate parts, meaning like my culture can be whole, each part of my racial identification can be whole, but it's all kind of, I think someone said, swirled together. So we're not making a puzzle piece, we're just putting the ice cream in there. Chocolate, little vanilla, strawberry.
Icing on the cake.
On ice.
Ooh, let's have some cake.
Ice cream cake. That's what it sounds like.
Oh, ice cream cake.
Putting it all together. See?
I should have. I'm going
to, right.
Give me a minute. I'm going to go out and buy an ice cream cake for us.
I mean, can we break down that metaphor? You have the eggs. I was wholly made from an egg.
Well, here we go. Here we go. But what about a vegan cake?
You put the flour in. I substitute applesauce in for eggs all the time. But it's still saying that this is a whole ingredient that I'm putting into a person. And at the end of it, I have the milk, I have the eggs, I have the butter, I have the flour. And now I didn't make different separate little intangible items. I made something that's fully functioning and whole and is delicious. And we should definitely have cake after this. But you know what I'm saying? It's like it exists fully formed. And you don't have to take away one part for you to try to understand. That one part has to belong inside of it for that thing to make sense. And of course, I'm talking about people, but
I like it.
Really made out of milk.
That's because I think that's a really good tool for kind of dealing with duality. So it's like, oh, like I see this person and maybe they have different parts, and then using the cake, I like that because it's like, it makes sense. With the cake, there's a lot of different ingredients, but when you take a bite of that cake, like one of the ingredients you don't taste is the eggs. You can't taste it, but it's there. So I think to be able to look at another person as a whole is like, I think one of the ways to, this is going to sound weird, one of the ways to taste another person.
No, I think you're right in line with the way Vitasha thinks. This is
is, I had to go there, is to have conversation.
That's right.
So I think by conversing with each other, we can do that thing where we get a sense of wholeness over time.
That to me brings to point that initial idea about that race is a construct. It's something that was meant to initially create division. As far as I'm, relating to it and what I'm reading and learning, So even when we get into this mixed race conversation, I like where we're heading with this idea of the finished cake product. We're not even worrying so much about that there was this part egg, this part flour, this part applesauce, this part. We are appreciating the whole that has been a product of it, rather than sitting here trying to decide and, you know, take it all apart. We're letting it be one. And I feel like that kind of approach, I'm curious how much that could be of benefit to other topics as well, if we could think of each other that way as whole beings versus the separate components. Now, having said that, I also think there are times and cases where being able to identify with the distinct parts is also crucial for our development of understanding who we are. For example, my coming to understand about my Japanese side has been helpful because my brother and I, we didn't really get a lot from our father to know that part of our identity. So for me, it became important later in life, and I sought it out to get to know a little bit of my Japanese heritage. Same thing with being Jewish. Like, I'm really grateful we did get to dive into our Jewish side, and have built some of who I am. I feel like we've built some of who we are based on that kind of an upbringing.
Thanks to our mother.
Thanks to our mother, exactly. But in the end, the practice is to, you know, unify all of this and not, well, I think everyone will have a different in the end, but in the end is to see, okay, I'm grateful of all these components, but I do want to focus on the wholeness of who I am. And at the same time, it's because of those parts that I see the world the way that I do. So, you know,
But I think that's completely internalization, and internalization, any of your self-work has to be separate from your outside world. I don't think that those two things should interfere, in the sense that a person should not be able to define for you who you are. However, you can go to a person, like you're saying, your Japanese heritage, and say, oh, I see this of you. And because I see that of you, you look like me, you are like me. I understand myself more, because that is a part of me that I would have never otherwise recognized unless I had had this conversation with you. But I don't think that's exterior work. I think that's completely internalized. And for people like me, who have a very wildly mixed heritage, so much that it's undefined in so many ways that, unfortunately for me, I can never put together, because I'm apparently native to this land of America somehow, but I'm also native to the entire continent of Africa. That's a very large place. So it's not like I can piece together something that makes sense. However, I understand like DNA and biology, you can do all that, but we're not talking about that. But
Well, all that and all that was based on duality. So
Yeah.
our American science and DNA and defining races and all that, that's all through the tool of duality. So yeah, it's like we have these concepts that are dualistic that were handed to us by duality.
But
Sometimes useful, sometimes not.
There's fallacy in the DNA profiles that they build, because they're just inaccurate. They can only say so much, and they can only point toward a region. And that's what I was trying to say, is that it doesn't really even give you a clear picture. So it's almost like you're just saying, you have to go to people, you have to meet people, you have to see for yourself and recognize the parts that are you in someone else to sometimes see a clear version of who you are, because it just it becomes very difficult. But I do want to share, because I'm becoming long-winded, I'll try to shorten it, that I have met people from the country of Africa in different parts. So not just like one country here and just one area, but over the entire continent. Because while I was in school, we just had a lot of exchange students, and I was privileged to be in that sort of a company. And while I was kind of visiting with them and learning with them, I recognize a lot of the parts that are myself. A lot of the ways that my mom makes food is similar to the way that they made food, even though they're far removed from one another. So I think certain things, they just persist, even if you don't actually have the acknowledgement or awareness of it. So that's why I'm saying that sometimes it's more internal work than trying to externally validate who you are.
I like that. You know, it's funny, Vitasha, I think about the fact that you lived in Japan, or you were stationed in Japan, isn't that right? And so on some level, your experience with Japanese culture is far greater than what my brother and I have. And it's like, in some level, you're more Japanese than we are, because you have
Yeah.
you probably sense what it's like in an internal experience based on an external interaction, but that we don't even have. So ours only can be from internal sensing, I guess, based, and also, I guess, utilizing some external.
But then we've run into other people who are Japanese and half Japanese in our life that we've come to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a
I don't-
limited experience with the culture that's come here to America.
I
Oh.
also I don't see that big of a difference, if to be perfectly honest. I really don't. I think because once you and I don't want to say that I was in Japan and I became of Japan, because that's not the truth of it at all. I was always only an observer, always on the outside, because it did not belong to me. It wasn't mine. I think that's just something that we in this country are able to navigate a little bit more. Just because I'm immersed in a culture does not mean that I'm taking from it. I'm not giving it to myself. I'm just here to be respectful, to observe in a polite way, and augment my personality to reflect theirs so that I don't cause problems. But I will tell you 100% that they are not a lot like me at all. I get excited. I get very loud. It's not in that culture. So then I think what you're saying makes a little bit of sense in the way that I'm trying to understand that because I saw so many of the differences, I was able to understand myself so much more. Because I saw, okay, well, you guys, you have more quietness. And I'm more of a person that's more peaceful and loud. And so then now I'm understanding, why am I a loud person? Why is that indicative of me? Is that something that's culturally relevant to who I am? Or is that just the nature of me? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that speaks volumes in your relationship to visiting a place and learning how to honor, versus what tends to happen is we want to either consume it, colonize it, make it our own. So I just really appreciate your nature and respecting a culture, and being able to see yourself more. I think that's really cool. You know, it's like you weren't trying to blend or minimize or maximize. It was like, oh, this is who I am, and that's who this culture, what that particular moment in time of that culture, you know, you're only getting a very particular slice of an experience. It's like somebody landing in Ohio and saying, oh, I know America, versus somebody who's really traveled. So it's learning to appreciate and see that there are, kind of back to what we were talking about before, like the differences, but also the similarities. Be open to difference versus indifference, not indifference. What was the two things you were talking about earlier, the Stevebros?
Familiarity and unfamiliarity.
Yeah, that's it. Familiarity and unfamiliarity. Yeah.
And speaking of words, I want to look at the definition of one of our big words of the day, which was construct, that you brought out, the Marc Bros. So here's a definition that I think is pretty good. In philosophy, A construct is an object which is ideal, that is, an object of the mind or thought, meaning that its existence may be said to depend on a subject's mind. So like all of these things, when we go into duality and we take a person apart and it's like, oh, they talk like this, they look like this, they walk like this, instead of seeing the person as a whole, that kind of thinking is dependent on the human mind. If the human mind is removed from the situation, then the thing is just the thing, or the person is just the person. But, and it also, the construct approach also made me think of, we have like borders to our countries. That's another construct. And then we put all the people that are supposed to fit into those borders as this, you know, so Germany, those people in those borders are German. But it's all just constructs. It's just ideas that we're creating that don't have any physical component, or don't have a that don't actually exist without the human mind. Like the borders drawn around countries. Like if you go out and travel the world, you're not going to see a border at every country.
Not every country. Some like a river, or
well, like China has I think they still have the wall of China.
Well, yeah, there are definitely some, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I want to just say, I like where you're going, in that how much of this is the mind, that the limited mind trying to make sense of something that's so grand that there's truly no real way to do that. So what we do is we come up with limited ways to create everything from physical landmarks to language, because even our words fall short of being able to express fully a full comprehensive experience of being human and being alive and being a spiritual being having a human experience. So it's all a construct. And on some level, I think about this not to bring up politics too much, but it's sort of maybe more of a governing perspective on politics. How do you manage masses of people? And so there does have to be some kind of construct that we create an agreement on. But how much of that is supporting our journey, and how much of that is preventing us from really understanding wholeness, oneness, togetherness, you know? And how much is it not possible? How much of it is overly idealistic? And how much of it do we learn to dance with instead of, you know, always trying to pick it apart? And that to me is that mixed perspective, mixed construct, even, if you will. And so any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, I guess we've got, is it true that we have 4 minutes left?
No, we have an hour, so 12:30.
Oh, 12:30. Okay. So like, that's one topic that I'm always interested in is, for example, how does the federal government of America manage all these people? There's like there's like, I don't know, maybe somewhere over 3 million people in the executive branch, which kind of runs a lot of the country. So it's kind of like administratively, you have about 3 million people, or 3 million plus. And then I think America's like getting close to 400 million. So it's like, can 3 million actually manage 400 million people? And the answer to that should be clear to anybody who lives in America. No, they cannot manage every single person and see to the welfare of every single person. So I don't know if that's go ahead, Natasha.
What if it was all an unintentional consequence?
What is that?
What if this was all by accident? Seriously. Like, okay, so we made a whole country. Like, how did that happen? We're like, I like this land. It's pretty cool. It's mine now. Don't try to take it from me.
Yeah, it was
and
an
that's
accident.
how you have a country.
Yeah, it was an accident because
So,
we created the Constitution, or they created the Constitution as a construct of law.
they're like, these
And
people are
then
getting
over
out of
time,
control.
a lot of it just became irrelevant. And now we can't run the country.
Well, I think they keep trying. I don't think they're succeeding, but I think they keep trying. I think that's the thing that, okay, I think they're like, hey, we have a lot of people. We got to do something about it because they're just out here running crazy. And we have to tell them what to do. But when we're telling people what to do, now we're making people into who they are. So now we're saying, this is who you are because you live here, because we tell you these are the things you're supposed to do. You have to wear clothes. You have to wear shoes. This is the kind of food that we grow here, so you should probably eat it. And this is the resources that we have to give to you for you to live here. And this is who you are now. Well, I think that's very specific to where you're living. And I think we might just be putting way too much emphasis on something that's really an accident altogether, that now we're identifying ourselves by what we look like and what we say and how we speak the language. I mean, there are just some people who cannot pronounce other consonants. So if you can't pronounce a letter, why use it at all? Just make up another one that makes more sense. You know what I mean? Like there's whole entire countries, whenever you look at the English alphabet versus theirs, they have extra letters, extra consonants, extra sounds that have nothing to do with the English language, or a little more indicative of the Latin languages. I think Latin's the one that we all come from, right? Like
Yeah.
Englishly. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like there's a base language and we're like, I can't read this. Let me try to figure out what makes sense for us to read it. And now these people are identifying in that way. Maybe none of this is even necessary.
I think that, again, expanding the perspective, so we let our brain go, yeah, what if it wasn't necessary? You know, and I love it. And so let's take a moment. And what would it be like what if all of these rules, constructs were released? But then here's where I think, and I'm actually going to read what Anjali wrote, because I think it comes back around to some of our topic here. So Anjali was responding to something you said a little earlier, but she said, indeed, Stevebros, I like where you're going. And a lot of it is very much about constructs placed by people. People even create constructs on themselves, the mind. We don't even use the full capacity of our brains. Imagine if we did. So what would start to happen is, if we gave full volition to every individual to create, would it create a more harmonious world, or would it create a collective, anarchistic, would we get back to where we actually already are? That's sometimes what I tend to think. If we don't do some work to expand the mind and to have broader conversations like we're having, would we actually just get right back to where we are, because we're dealing with a limited mind that's trying to organize based on its original function in the nervous system to seek safety and to seek familiarity.
Yeah, I just got something off of what you said. If people were encouraged to create themselves, like say that was like the new prime directive. So like the American federal government's like, all right, you all have the freedom to create yourself. And until you tell us what you've created, we don't know who you are.
Wow.
And so then I think that would be good. And I think we would avoid coming back to the limited mind, because then one of the major conversation topics, just like, the weather's a topic like that you can use for anybody, any kind of stranger. The topic would be, how are you creating yourself today?
Wow.
So instead of somebody assuming, oh, you look like, a lot of people, I wear a hoodie a lot, and they think that I'm Latino. And they're like, oh yeah, you look Latino. But instead of somebody assuming what you are by how you look, instead they would be asking a question. How are you creating yourself today? How have you created yourself?
I love that. So it's so funny. I don't know how I get into these conversations, but last night I was talking about the allegory of the cave. I can't explain it well, but I know Mukunda can. But what you're seeing is the expansive knowledge. And for the expansive knowledge to exist, we all have to leave the cave. And it's quite improbable to get everyone in mass numbers to all agree on one thing. And to do the thing of defining yourself is a thing that we're never going to be able to get mass people to agree on. It's said for years and years of exposure where we finally get to conversations like this where we're like, who cares? We all live here. We're all like of the same vibe. We're all in the same trying to build together and grow together. How about that be the important part? Not language you speak, not the way that you act. It just becomes unnecessary for me to judge you anymore. And instead, now I'm embracing and loving your differences because your differences add up to the things that I lack. Like, I can't walk into a crowd of people and have them all calm down because I insist upon it. I am chaos. I will get them all riled up because that is who I am, you know? So it's, you need the both, you need the all. And eventually we'll get to that part where we'll just be like, I understand who I am and I'm able to act and behave in the way that I am regardless of your social construct, of your stupid rules, and whatever this dumb reality is decided that it works, you know?
Yes. Where my mind tends to go is I think about how nature functions. And we can think about everything from a simple field where there's grass and there's trees and there's flowers and there's weeds and there's bugs and there's creatures underground, above ground. And somehow there's coexistence happening. In that coexistence, things are being eaten, things are being killed, things are being reborn. Right, it's a whole flow that's happening. And what's not happening is a lot of emotional involvement of like, oh no, that at least not that we're super conscious of. I think there's definitely some sensation in plant and certainly in animal life in terms of birth and loss. But there's a certain flow that is different than the way we've assigned it. I think we also can acknowledge that our culture is built on capitalism. So we have the culture has a need for there to be some kind of progress based on gain that is material bound, rather than one that is based on nature's evolution, I think. So if we have this mind that's based on growth, promotion, and sustenance because of an external thing that needs to be replicated and owned, then I feel like we're forever going to get stuck. But unfortunately, I think that's where we are. I don't know that that's going to be something we're going to necessarily completely dismantle. But I like this approach. I'm going to come back to like even what you said, Steve, this, how are you creating yourself today? And the language we can start to bring to one another that actually shifts that thinking, because the existence of all this stuff is going to be there. I've kind of reached a point. I don't know that we're going to dismantle all of that today, but what can we do today is reference our relationship to one another. Anybody else have some thoughts? I'm looking at Instagram Live, folks. You're all welcome to join in on the conversation too.
Are they able
I
to?
mean,
I don't know. Are you able to? Maybe. I thought.
well,
Anyway.
I think in the last 100 years, I think that's a good number to go back to, 1923.
Okay.
We have grown a lot because of technology, because of that. So then what is the next 100 years with this complete conversation that we're having completely unnecessary at that point? And that's always my hope for the world, that like just get a little scanner and scan my badge. And this tells you about me. If you don't want to interact with the version of me that I'm wearing on my sleeve, then you may continue on your way. And I love that consideration that I'm able to define who I am. And it's just no longer acceptable for people to label me for however they want to. But I think that you have to get a very high awareness of who you are, acceptance of your own flaws, and embracing of everything that made you to be the you that you are, and respecting, of course, everything that you came from before you became you, before your parents became you, because at every point of your entire life, you're carrying on your back all of the people who came before you to make you you. You can't disregard or disrespect who they are as a people because they're still living because you still live. So it kind of has to balance in some sort of way.
I wish that was part of our educational system more than some of the other things that we tend to teach, but that it was about embracing who you are. Let's do, things in school for kids where they learn to appreciate each of their ancestral lineages. They get to appreciate the nature that makes them a little different from the person sitting next to them. They have tools to learn how to manage when they're feeling stressed, when they're to accept and welcome when they're feeling sad or whatever emotions are there, rather than just computing. There's great function in that, but I also think we miss a lot in the human experience in our educational system. But can we do that now? Can we build and work on that now? Because I agree, Natasha, that work first, or somewhere in the mix where you are recognizing your own responsibility that impacts the way you are in community. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of the problems come up because duality can be a helpful tool, but if duality gets overused, then it's kind of like diminishing returns. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought.
I'll come back to the allegory of the cave because I like that, Natasha, and I think that, and maybe Steve, if you think whatever you think was coming forward, let us know. But it's this idea that you don't know what you haven't yet seen, and you make sense out of something that you think you're seeing. So in the allegory of the cave, it's that they see the shadows of the outside world on the cave wall, and they assume that's reality. But reality is actually what's happening outside of the cave, but they don't know that there is anything outside of the cave. So they spend their existence assuming that they are watching reality in front of them. So until somebody actually invites them to have the experience of, going out, there isn't an ability to comprehend, potentially even an inability to see that there is a way out. They talk about this with the Native Americans when the ships were coming in to the land that didn't even see ships. It took one of their shamans to say something's coming, because this is a story I've read, that they actually had no concept of a ship, so they didn't even see that there was a ship. So how much of our life is that way too, that until we have some kind of exposure to all this, the things we're talking about, and back to what you were talking about, and Stevebros mentioned about isolation, if we don't have the exposure to it, there is no reference to accept that then, okay, there is some ignorance, like you said, Natasha, just simply something that we don't know. So can we do something that helps us develop knowingness? And that's where, again, I think we come back to spiritual practice, we come back to community, conversation, interaction, and that to me is our theme.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, is like duality can be a useful tool, but without a spiritual practice, for example, meditation, we don't have a way to take a break from duality. But when we do meditate, and we let our mind rest from all the planning mind, the duality mind, the thinking mind, and then we just become us, a whole spiritual being in meditation, that's one tool to help mitigate overusing duality. That's what I wanted to say.
Perfect. And in that moment of that meditative space, we become 100% mixed. I love when Vitasha gives me the shaking head. There he goes. Well, it's because we're coming up to the end, and that's why I was so grateful that I could bring in that kind of moment to seal the deal here. And that, I think, is where we are. It's the conversation that stimulates the brain to see parts that we might not have seen or thought of, but that also to bring in our spiritual practices here. It's in that moment of silence when we can go beyond that field of right and wrong. We go beyond that field of shoulds and shouldn'ts, beyond that field of construct. There is a space where we do connect. And this is from that Rumi poem that I'm alluding to. I can't think of the exact name, but it's this idea that it's beyond that field that we actually connect. And that's where practice helps us tap into that innate part of us. And when we can do that, I think we can come back to this material bound world and consider there's another approach. Any last thoughts from each of you as I look up this poem that I'm trying to relate to?
Real quick. And the other thing that has happened with me in meditation is tapping into the collective unconscious. So that's like another huge information source that can help every individual kind of navigate in this complex world. We had, meditating and going into non-duality in that way, and also connecting to the collective unconscious is a way for people with limited experience to navigate more fully.
Any last thoughts, Vitasha, from you?
I was just gonna say that the question that I keep getting is, why is this yoga? How is this yoga? What are we doing while sitting here talking about concepts that are sometimes beyond our own selves? And sometimes we're not even completely in that concept. And I think literally what he just said is because we have to find a different way of connecting. And in that connecting is the yoga, is the connecting to one another, is the way that we're building our practice. And then this is my yoga for me. This is my teaching. This is my learning. This is me being a student. This is also in that same mindset.
Yeah, this is our practice. Welcome to our practice. Here it is.
Awesome. Well said. That's what these Empower Hours hopefully aim to achieve, is that this is practice time, because we do stretch the way we think, that we do connect with one another and ourselves in a more authentic way. The poem I'll end our session today with is the one I was alluding to. It's called A Great Wagon, and it's from the mystic saint Rumi, Persian poet. I guess he wasn't really a saint, but I consider him one, with his use of words. So in the middle, it's the middle verse that is often referenced. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Thank you all for joining on Instagram Live. Thank you for Vitasha and the Stevebros and Anjali being a part of our group, our steady Empower Hour team. And I look forward to meeting again in this format next month. These are monthly talks. You can join, as you know, Instagram Live, on Zoom, or even come to the studio if it calls to you, and that's a possibility. All right, until then, be well.